The original Five Nights at Freddy's game came out in 2014, and just over 11 years later is one of the largest horror game series in the world, rivaling games like Minecraft and Fortnite in popularity. It is literally everywhere, and with the second movie having just come out, I thought now would be a great time to look back at where it all started, the games themselves, and show my definitive ranking of every FNAF game from worst to best. However, ranking them all would be a true challenge, since there are a total of 28 different games if you include every spin-off, every DLC, every mobile game, etc. So for this video, I'll be only going over the main 11 games in the franchise, so Five Nights at Freddy's 1 to Secret of the Mimic, as well as FNAF World, FNAF Ruin, and 5 Laps at Freddy's. I won't be including the Freddy in Space games, Fury's Rage, FNAF Movie Game, or AR. I know some of you are huge fans of these games, but in contrast to the other games, there's just not as much to them, and it wouldn't be fair to include them, since they would literally just be on the bottom of the list anyways. They are all worse than the worst games on this list. But with all that out of the way, let's get into this massive list that totally will never be outdated, but will also probably never be updated, because we do not need any more of these types of videos. This is my final list of every FNAF game ranked worst to best. In dead last, we have a game that I nearly didn't include because it technically falls into the spin-off category. However, it's technically getting a full release, so 5 Laps at Freddy's. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I did have fun playing this game. For the first 5 minutes. Yeah, so this is by far the single worst kart game that I have ever played, and there are a multitude of reasons for that. Now, I do understand this game is free and it's not fully released yet, but there is just so many problems that this game has already just puts this immediately at the bottom of the list. The biggest one being that this go-karting game is single player, and from what I know, is always going to be single player with no plans to make it multiplayer. Now, I'm sorry to be that guy, but what the actual fuck? Who plays a karting game for the sake of playing it by themselves? Yeah, that's right, literally no one. And don't be that guy in the comments who's like, I play Mario Kart by myself all the times, and I prefer it to playing with friends. No, you do not. This game has already failed because of this one factor. However, it's not the only flaw that this game has. It's by far the weirdest go-kart game that I have ever played, playing both on controller and keyboard and mouse, which is horrid by the way. Not to mention, this game has so many bugs. Like the fact that the racers can just stop driving is hilarious. Plus, there's massive exploits that any kart game should be thinking about before even making it. Like being able to teleport yourself out of bounds to skip laps, which is a hefty oversight. I'm not going to talk much more about this game because honestly, there's not a whole lot here. It's 3 courses, a couple of characters, and cars, which mean nothing because there's clearly a meta with the purple car. And look, the music is really good. Not anything amazing, but it's definitely underrated. However, this is a game you play once for the fun of it and never go back to it. If this game was ever to cost money, it would be worse than all the spin-off games in AR. This game is horrid and has absolutely nothing going for it. So just know every game from this point onwards does at least have one thing going for it. So if you don't count 5 Laps at Freddy's as an actual game, then Ruin is probably the worst. Now, if you say it's a DLC and it doesn't count, well then you can wait for the next one. However, in my opinion, Ruin is definitely long enough and unique enough to be considered its own game. But why is it so bad? Well, for starters, my main complaint, the gameplay is absolutely atrocious from beginning to end. They basically made a worse movement to Gregory, which makes the whole game feel more sluggish and slow. The game is practically a walking simulator and it's horrid. There are 2 different types of puzzles in this game, the AR World puzzles and the Phasmunch puzzles. Both these puzzles are stupidly easy, and they are solved in quite literally a few seconds, and it gets boring pretty much instantaneously. The threats in this game are practically non-existent if you never enter the AR world. Basically, nothing can kill you. The threats are almost entirely dependent on this blue bunny guy showing up, but he's so easy to deal with that the entire game just results in the same terrible gameplay loop. Walk until you need to use the mask, do the puzzle, blue rabbit comes, take off the mask, literally wait 30 seconds doing absolutely nothing, put mask back on and complete puzzle, and then repeat. It's so mind-numbingly boring and such terrible gameplay design. The horror in this game is practically non-existent too. Sure, on a surface level, it's trying to be scarier than Security Breach, but it actually feels less scary because it's trying so hard. The ruined animatronics are not scary at all, or worse, have so much personality that you just find them amusing, or as the game tries so hard to do, make you feel bad for them. When the scariest characters in your game are the ones that have literally no personality, aka the Endos and the prototype Glamrock Freddy, you should really focus on that instead of building character in your horror game. The designs on all the animatronics are pretty awful, and it makes it really hard to get into the characters. When they show up, that is. The jump scares in this game are also complete arse, and they feel like drawn out death animations to a frightening jump scare. It's an absolute joke. The last thing I want to talk about is the Mimic. Look, I get some people really love the Mimic and think he's really cool, but I'm gonna be honest, I could not care less about this character. He feels like the Disney twist villain who just suddenly appears out of nowhere, and it would have been way cooler if the hints that he was a robot were a little bit less obvious. Plus, I find the concept and the ending to be really confusing and really bizarre. That final chase sucks. Overall, this game is just so unbelievably boring with zero redeeming qualities. Well, except for the soundtrack. That's okay, but nothing really special. So unfortunately, this game belongs at the bottom of the list. Honestly, if I could, I would put it below 5 Lap, since in that game, you at the very least have something happening on your screen, but objectively, this game is better. Now, it's safe to say that FNAF Sister Location is the black sheep of the original games. Sister Location is a very interesting game in the franchise as it's so unique that people either really love or really hate this one. And I've heard the arguments for both sides, and as you can probably tell, I fall into the side of this game is absolutely awful in every single way. Okay, that's not entirely true. I mean, there are some positives to this game. The actual story of this game is quite well told, and the visuals can be pretty spectacular at times, as well as the jump scares being really good overall, and the sound design and ambience being top tier, as well as the music being absolutely excellent and some of the most underrated in the entire series. And of course, the custom night. Now, I will personally say that while the custom night and ended night are the best parts of the game, I would go as far as to say that I think these two nights are very overrated and not as good as people give it credit for. End of night being 9 minutes long is absolutely ridiculous, especially given the massive checkpoint if you lose, which will probably happen the first time that you play this, and the custom night's main quality being how fair and consistent it is. You never really feel like you're being screwed over. However, the gameplay isn't all that fun or interesting, especially considering how they left out so many characters, but also you can't customize the AI of this so-called custom night, which is really bizarre. But anyways, the actual main game of Sister Location is honestly terrible. There is zero replayability and it relies so heavily on that first time playthrough to accomplish anything, but even then, the actual gameplay is really uninteresting, boring, and at times frustrating. An obvious contender for this spot would be Night 4, which just picks up the difficulty in a way that just ruins the entire experience. And while with enough practice, it really isn't that bad, it's a jump in difficulty that this game just didn't need. Night 1 literally has nothing. Night 2 has a lot, but all the minigames are bad. Night 3 has one minigame, and it's easy and not very good. Night 4 has one minigame, and it's super difficult out of nowhere. Night 5 is boring with literally nothing going on, probably the worst night in the entire game. And even if you do Ended Night, if you die, you have to do the entire night again. And this brings me to the checkpoints in this game, which are absolutely unacceptably bad. Having to restart an entire night because you died at the end of a 9-minute night is ridiculous, and the slow-paced nature makes it so sluggish and boring that you just get so unbelievably angry playing this game. And if I'm playing a game and getting angry when it's meant to be a horror game that I'm getting scared at, you failed at horror. And while this game has some stuff going for it, it failed on so many levels. And look, I really don't like these styles of games, but this game was a half-assed version of a choose-your-own-adventure style game, which would have been actually kind of cool at the very least. But instead, we get this half-baked mess, and it's really disappointing. And for that, it belongs here on the list.
Oh my gosh! Wow, he's gonna do it! He's gonna be doing it!
Now, there are a couple of games on this list that my opinion's completely changed on, and this game has to be the #1 example on that, since Ultimate Custom Night was #2 on my last list, and now it's all the way down at the bottom, not even breaking the top 10. And this might surprise a lot of people, since Ultimate Custom Night is sometimes referred to as one of the greatest FNAF games, or at the very least the most unhurtful game, as it was just a nice tie-up to the original run of FNAF games. But I will say this with full confidence. This game sucks. In terms of being a custom night that's ultimate, sure, they did do that. There's 50 characters, a lot of iconic moments, a decent soundtrack, and a super difficult mode that will test every single max modder or diehard FNAF fan to its absolute limits. And when I tell you as someone who nearly beat 50/20 that this game sucks, it sucks. The actual gameplay loop of Ultimate Custom Night is so fundamentally flawed that it's not even funny. The amount of RNG and exploits needed to beat this game is so laughable that I can't even call it a game and instead call it a waiting simulator. 95% of the time you were spent in the office just waiting for the ventilation to go out and then working to fix the 3 things that have gone wrong, and it's just boring. Ultimate Custom Night doesn't have an interesting gameplay loop to it, and obviously that's because this game is nothing but the Custom Night. And I know that there were software restrictions and that's why the game is the way it is, but this game didn't need to be made in Click Team. On that note, yeah, the jump scares are ass, but whatever, I really don't care. I think this game has become a bit of a cult classic in recent years, and while I hate it because it's boring and I want to stay as far away from the max mode community as possible, I can't say the game is harmful for existing. If this game cost money, I would have a much bigger problem with it, but it's free, so whatever. The most fun in this game is actually learning it, and it does have a lot of things going for it there. However, once you actually learn how everything works, this game goes downhill so fast and it's just not interesting or fun. And that's a shame, because you would think given the success and love of Sister Location's Custom Night, Scott would have tried to achieve a similar result. But alas, we get what we get.
I'm Shadow Freddy, I'm so awesome and black. I'm
Now, if you have seen this channel before, you know that FNAF 2 is a game that I haven't had the most fun of times with. And I won't talk about this game all that much since I have a video coming out discussing my new thoughts on FNAF 2 in detail, but a quick recap. This game is nowhere near as bad as I originally said it was, but it still has some absolutely insane issues, mainly being the actual gameplay loop of Five Nights at Freddy's 2. The most mind-numbing, most repetitive, most soulless rhythm game ever, and it's just a shame because this game actually has a lot of really cool ideas, and this game just feels like a bag of missed potential, but I won't go too much into that there because you can just watch this video when it comes out, or if it's already out, you can, watch it now to get a fair review on both the good and the bad, because there is a lot of good in this game, and I go into a lot more detail on that video. However, the main gameplay loop and how certain parts are utilized really drag the experience down and make this game be where it is on the list. Our first game in the top 10, and this one I can tell will probably upset a lot of people. But after replaying most of the games for this video, Five Nights at Freddy's Pizzeria Simulator is by far the most overrated game in the entire franchise, and honestly, it is not all that good. But first, let's talk about the positives. The soundtrack in this game is absolutely peak, and honestly probably the single best soundtrack in the entire franchise, with only a few games rivaling it in my opinion. The Tycoon section is absolutely incredible, and super fun of all the lore elements really selling this section for me. And the ending, by God the ending is so good. While it's not my personal favourite, it is probably the best ending of every FNAF game, and I will die on that hill, just like the children did. But anyways, but now on to the bad. For starters, the salvage section. While I don't think this mode is unbelievably terrible, I do wish there was some variety, as all the salvage sections were exactly the same, and it's honestly kind of boring. In fact, that's why I made this video here, where I made concepts of the Pizza Sim characters, because this part of the game is just honestly a tad boring on repeat playthroughs. But the worst aspect of this game, by far, is the office section. Everyone comments on how this is the worst part of the game, but I don't think people realize just how awful this section actually is. For starters, in terms of animatronic threats, they are all really boring, and the night basically just boils down to getting the tasks done as fast as possible before the animatronics make it to you, and then just deciding to kill you no matter what. The act of waiting for a task to complete is super boring. It's like if in FNAF 3 you only use the maintenance panel. It's super boring. And while I do like the idea of the night being based on your ability to complete it rather than a set time, the problem with this is that no one actually wants to do this part of the game. The actual fun factor is non-existent, and on top of that, it's the only part of the game where you are actually forced to do it. Even with no animatronics in the building, you are forced to spend at least 2 minutes doing this. And if you add animatronics to it, each night can get long really fast, and there are a lot of waiting in the actual gameplay. Besides the tycoon, of course, and waiting is honestly extremely boring. Now, speaking of the animatronics, I don't know what Scott was smoking when he made the character designs, but the main four are honestly not that great. Maybe not as bad as I have said in the past, but Scraptrap is probably the single worst designed animatronic ever, and the jump scares aren't scary in the scary part of the game, which is a real shame in my opinion. I will say the rest of the cars have decent designs overall, and Lefty is one of my favorites. But overall, I don't think the designs are anything to write home about, and if this game was really meant to be the one of bringing back all the animatronics to one place, why would you introduce new ones? Why not just have the old FNAF crew come back, but whatever, it's not really that big of a deal. Overall, I don't think this game is that bad, especially because it is free, and like a lot of FNAF games, it has become a cult classic among the community, and I do understand why people absolutely love this game. But for me, it's extremely overrated and not a game I really look forward going back to. So it'll sit here at number 10. So here we are, the newest game in the franchise at the time of recording this video, and probably the last FNAF game that I will ever talk about unless the next one blows my mind. Although, I won't lie, I am very worried about the state of FNAF games, as I really don't know where they're going to actually go from here. But anyways, let's actually talk about the Mimic game. Now, right off the bat, the content of this game is absolutely bonkers to me, and not really that interesting in the slightest. But that's probably just an opinion piece, so I'll let it slide. But it does lead to a point that I have about the actual characters in this game. Why are these early models so high-tech? One of the biggest immersion breakers in this game is 100% the fact that this game apparently takes place in the 70s, and I just cannot believe it, and it really takes you out of the experience. But anyways, onto the actual game itself. Secret of the Mimic is just your generic walking simulator game where you walk from set piece to set piece, while maybe doing a puzzle here and there and ending every chapter with a chase scene. While the environment and everything is actually really cool, I feel like they don't do as much with it as they could have, and I felt like this game played it very safe, while also trying to force a story that isn't honestly that good. Sure, maybe it's well told, but I didn't get invested into the story at all, which was really unfortunate. On top of this game having that trope of killing every single fucking character, while also not really exploring the character of the Mimic, who again, isn't really all that interesting. The Mimic is really just an endoskeleton, and the whole mimicking idea isn't really shown at all. What we see in the game is quite literally possession, not mimicking. Plus, the idea of a mimic who can possess any suit gets laughably predictable and isn't used in any meaningful way. In my opinion, a cooler idea would have been if the game was fully free roam, like another game that we'll talk about soon, and that when you do a certain thing like walk down a hallway enough times, you can have the Mimic possess a suit in that way, so it's not random, and also makes it so the Mimic learn based on your patterns, which seems like a more Mimic thing to do, but you know, anyways, I guess we'll just let that slide. In terms of music, which is something that almost every FNAF game gets right, the Mimic soundtrack is okay, but honestly, it's a tad forgettable. The atmosphere of the costume factory is actually not that bad overall, and it's actually done quite well, with the sound design and visuals being quite nice, although making a game sound and look nice isn't the most difficult thing ever, especially with this level of budget. However, even though this game absolutely fails at horror and isn't scary, it does a much better job at creating a creepy atmosphere and doesn't rely on jump scares 24/7. Although with it being a FNAF game, you do know that there are going to be some jump scares, and some of them are really good, mainly the basic suits. But why on earth would you use the Security Breach jump scare sound effect for the 500th time? It's super out of place, and it's honestly the worst jump scare sound effect FNAF has ever had. But honestly, the main issue with this game is that it is extremely safe, doesn't introduce anything interesting, but most of all, it fails to capture the vibe that made FNAF so excellent. This game doesn't feel dark or creepy, no supernatural elements, just a meme and a dream. And while this game isn't terrible, and there at least is a game to play, it's still not that good, so it belongs here. Now, this game has had some interesting history. Arguably the single most hyped game in Five Nights at Freddy's history. Security Breach has had its fair share of good and bad. And to start off, let's talk about the good. The atmosphere and visual look to the pizzeria is amazing, and the Pizzaplex might be the single best FNAF location ever created. Maybe not the most iconic, but certainly the best. Just roaming the Pizzaplex is the most fun you can have in this game. The visuals are spectacular, and every part of this game looks great, and all the characters look and sound fantastic with excellent voice lines and iconic and memorable visuals. Glamrock Freddy, Monty, Roxy, Chica, Sun and Moon, Vanny, the staff bots, the list goes on. The soundtrack is absolutely incredible, and in the top 3 for FNAF soundtracks, with some extremely underrated tracks like Caught in a Loop and The Dance Floor, but of course the DJ Music Man boss fight, Daycare, and of course the main theme, which are all super catchy and iconic and really well made. The lore as well is pretty good. However, now we start to get into the negatives. Starting with, this game basically has zero story unless you are exploring the absolute depths of the Pizzaplex, which on the one hand doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world, since subtle lore where you need to actively go out of your way to find it is sometimes a great thing. However, the problem is, there is literally no story in the main game. So when you get to the end, you're looking for more story in the sense of you're missing the story, not that you want to learn more about the story. The missed opportunity in this game are very apparent throughout the Pizzaplex, and if I went throughout and listed every single one, we would be here all day. However, if there's one thing I can definitely complain about, it is the sheer amount of bugs, glitches, and unacceptable levels of lag that this game is filled to the brim with. And in a way, this does add a lot of charm to the game, since a buggy experience can be a fun one. However, Security Breach's bugs are on a whole other level, and it's pretty pathetic and ridiculous how broken this game is. It makes fucking Dead by Daylight look polished in comparison. You can clip through walls, break the game, soft lock yourself, all in the comfort of a normal playthrough. Most bugs don't require you to actually do anything to trigger them, they just happen. And while yes, nowadays this game is in a much healthier state, that doesn't really mean much when this game is 90 fucking gigabytes. Mimic by comparison, which is a very similarly sized game, is only 20. I know what you're gonna say. Oh, Jerikai, you silly goose. Ruin is attached to Security Breach. That's still not an excuse. This game is horrendously optimized, and while many FNAF games have this problem, this is the one time I will actually complain about it, because this is the game where it matters the most. It doesn't matter if FNAF 1 isn't optimized. No one is playing that game in 4K. Plus, why is the game 100 gigabytes? Now, all that aside, this game suffers from having a lot of cool moving parts, but very little interaction between those parts. There are so many awesome locations that never ever get explored, with many cool elements the story could have gone with, and more or less, complete neglection of the main villain. The fact that Vanny shows up a total of 4 times in the entire game is a joke. Sun gets like 2 minutes, Vanessa has 1 section where she can catch you. It's pretty sad. This game, in my opinion, would have been amazing if instead of the walking simulator game where you have to complete quests, they made the entire game a choose your own adventure style game. Let's say the game had like 12 main endings and 3 secret ones. I know it's a lot, but this is a pretty big game, so we could make it work. Have it so that every single action you take has an alternate path. The main story doesn't have you killing animatronics, but it's implied that you can, and depending on your actions, new lore is discovered, new gameplay opportunities present themselves, and overall you get a ton of replayability and a ton of exploration, and this combined with some changes to the horror and gameplay itself could make this a really cool experience. In fact, don't be surprised if I make a video discussing all these ideas in the future, because it would be really cool, but I'll save that for then and get back to the ranking. Overall, Security Breach is similar to FNAF 2 in that this is a game with a lot of missed opportunity and a lot of missed potential. And I truly believe that this is a game that had the potential to be the single greatest FNAF game ever made. But alas, it remains at the number 8 spot on our list due to poor execution. But let's move on. So Help Wanted 2 is a game that I've been talking a lot about in my friend group. It's not particularly a game that I find extremely engaging or interesting, though I have to say that the actual minigames and feel in VR is a lot of fun. And for both VR titles, I think it's apparent that I'll be looking at the VR version since flat mode will make me want to die. But anyways, Help Wanted 2. It takes the VR world of FNAF in a completely different direction compared to the first game, and to be honest, I don't really know how I feel about it. Firstly, the positives. This game has some really fun mini-games, and the controls are super smooth and easy to get into. The music in this game is really good, and the end credit music is some of the greatest pieces I've heard in a while. However, if I'm being completely honest, the main reason I don't like this game isn't necessarily because of any flaws in the game itself. The game runs well, plays well, and is very fun. However, I think this game really lacks the spark that makes FNAF so interesting and fun for me. The only minigame I really have fond memories of playing was the Princess Quest minigame, which admittedly was really amazing and super fun. Sure, the Bonnie Bowl, the Glamrock Freddy repair, and the minigame where you have to make fast food orders, which just felt like I was back working at McDonald's again, and definitely didn't give me massive PTSD from those days, but you know, this game is fun. I have compared this game a lot to like the old Carnival games, and I've referred to this game as the Wii Sports of the FNAF franchise, more times than I can count, and to me, that's all this game is and all this game wanted to be. It's just a bunch of really fun minigames, but unfortunately, they aren't that memorable to me, and that's just personal opinion. However, my main issue is that outside of the minigames themselves, there just isn't that much this game has going for me that makes it interesting. And it's not like if I want to play a Carnival game, I'm going to be going to FNAF Help Wanted 2. Why play that when I can play the actual Wii Sports, plus the hassle of being in VR and getting all that set up? This game just doesn't feel that worth it to me. Plus, I honestly have more fun playing Beat Saber. Don't get me wrong, this game isn't bad, and by all accounts, it's a good game. And a lot of fun, but to me, there's just nothing super interesting going on that makes this game stand out from the rest. It kind of just exists to exist, and for that, it remains here on the list. Now, I am sure a lot of you were probably expecting this game to be somewhere in the top 3, and judging by how much of a cult classic FNAF World has become, and considering that everyone in my friend group talks about this game consistently and constantly with remakes and fan games bringing new life to this game, you'd be surprised why it isn't up there as one of the greatest. Well, before I get into that, let's talk about the positives of this game, because obviously there is a lot. For starters, the music and atmosphere is actually really well done. Considering this is a very different departure to what FNAF was and is known for, all the music in this game just gets you going. The main world themes, the boss fights, the Scott fight, oh my god, Stone Cold is peak. But on that, the art style and design of all these characters is really good, and the combat is quite responsive and fun too. The collectibles are all fun, and there's a reason this game is so fun to just replay. The ships, the bites, the ability to challenge yourself and beat the game in any number of ways, which is just really awesome and encourages a ton of replayability. But you may be asking yourself, if I've just listed all these ways that this game succeeds and is a fun time, why only at number 6? Well, there are two main reasons for this. Firstly, the balancing of the game's enemies, characters, and bosses. This game is only really tricky at the start when you have no characters and no levels, and at the very end when you're taking on the final bosses. Otherwise, certain characters make this game just way too easy, especially if you get the Halloween characters. But even if you don't, there is just a ton of characters that make this game kind of a breeze to get through. Gift boxes as a move is single-handedly what makes this game a complete breeze. Combine moves like Unscrew, chips like Auto Shield, and you can cheese your way through even the strongest enemies. Some people may not see this as a problem, since being able to stomp through literally everything can be quite fun. But in my opinion, it's only fun for the first 5 minutes. Now, you just get bored when you steamroll through everything. Now, the second big issue this game has is its cryptic nature. I get that's this game's entire gimmick. It's meant to be tricky to navigate, and you need to find your way through all these sub-levels and glitches to get through walls and find secrets. However, I just don't think it works all that well, especially on a first playthrough, where everyone just hates trying to figure out where they're actually meant to go. Take World 4 and trying to get to World 5, for instance. You have to go to a completely different section of the first world to get there, and it's just really confusing, and this does actually bring up the issue that there is a lot of wasted space in this game, which is a real shame. Overall though, this game did what it wanted to do, and it's still a ton of fun, but the first playthroughs and balancing of the game does drag it down, since objectively, this is a pretty terrible RPG game, but alas, it's not the worst thing ever, and it's still a ton of fun, so it will stay here. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is an interesting game for this list, since out of the main 6, it is my personal favourite. However, it is a bit lower, since even though it's my favourite, taking everything else into account, it actually has some pretty big flaws. But before that, let's talk about the positives, because FNAF 3 actually has a lot of them. FNAF 3 is one of the most successful of the original games in utilising everything it has to its fullest potential, and it's the only game where you literally use every single resource you have at your disposal to deal with the threat at hand. You pretty much use all the cameras, the maintenance panel, and the vent snares throughout your entire playthrough, and it does all of this while only having one threat who is the single most incredible character ever conceived in the FNAF universe. Springtrap is an absolute horror icon, and it's up there with the greats in horror media, and it's probably up there for the single most recognisable and terrifying of all the horror game characters. His introduction in the game was both a mystery and a terror, and honestly, ever since he was added, the series hasn't been the same since, and he is a menace in this game, which really shows how much stronger he is compared to the rest of the cast. Onto the gameplay. While some people say it's stale, boring, and even repetitive, I think it's actually the most interesting, unique, and challenging, and most fun gameplay loop of the original series, which is why it's my favourite. Unlike the other game where there's a ton of predictable patterns you can exploit to either get the win almost every single time, FNAF 3 is probably the most unpredictable, and there's a lot that can go wrong, and that's where this game gets most of its fear from. It's almost like a predator playing with its food, which, it probably is. You need to be onto every little thing that's going on while being forced to make educated guesses based on audio cues, and it requires you to really pay attention and lock in. And I find this cat and mouse gameplay to actually be a ton of fun. Plus, unlike some FNAF games, there is a ton of creative freedom in terms of strategy and how you approach the game, which can create a ton of variety between gameplay, which is always a good thing. On that note, the atmosphere and sound design is pretty good, and the secret mini-games, the cutscenes, and the endings are some of the best in the series, with FNAF 3's good ending potentially being my favourite ending, and having my favourite piece of music in all of FNAF, which I can't play because of copyright. Thank you very much. But anyways, with all that being said, why have I put this game where it is? Well, this game has 3 pretty decent problems that kind of ruin the experience a bit. First and foremost, the complete lack of horror in this horror game. The horror in this game is just not knowing where Springtrap is and knowing that he is coming from you, but all games have this, so it's nothing to write home about. My second point is related to this, with the Phantoms being another downgrade. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't hate the ideas of the Phantoms and how they work, even though I think there should have been shadows instead of Phantoms, but the overwhelming amount of jump scares honestly gets annoying and ruins the horror, since by night 3, you're accustomed to the jump scares. And the fact that the scariest jump scare in this game is the puppet, since the first time that happens you will definitely shit bricks. However, that doesn't help the overall lack of horror that this game has, and when you consider Springtrap and his absolutely terrible jump scare, it's pretty bad. But the third big issue is how terrible the good ending is to get. I get being cryptic, but it's so specific that any normal player will have literally zero idea what to do and will be completely lost without a guide. How the fuck people ever found out how to do this, I will never know. Overall, FNAF 3 has a lot of positives, introduce a lot of amazing things to the franchise, as well as having a pretty decent gameplay loop. However, those couple of problems really hold this game back from going any higher on the list, and although I enjoy this game more than the next two, I can't say that they don't deserve their spots. So every game series has to start somewhere, and normally the first game in a series is looked back on quite fondly, and Five Nights at Freddy's 1 is no exception. You have probably heard over 1 million different reasons why this game was so good. However, I want to take a little step back and talk about how this game hasn't really aged well at all. Now, you can't hold this game to too high of a standard. I mean, this game wasn't never meant to be that big in the beginning, it wasn't expected for sure, and although there are a ton of issues with the visuals and optimization and software and technical stuff by today's standards, I don't think it completely ruins the game at all. The main issue that this game has is that it's been dissected to death, and the horror, while I still think it can be effective considering how many new players I've seen get absolutely mortified by this game, it's definitely worn off. However, I still think this game has effective horror, as I said before. The atmosphere is top tier, the animatronics designs are in my opinion the best in the series, the game did the best job of making this place realistic, and in my opinion it's the most realistic restaurant and location with the most realistic animatronics in the entire series. Scott really hit it out of the park with the designs and visuals here, even if it hasn't aged the best by today's standards. There's no denying nostalgia is a huge factor in this specific game's continued success, but I think this game is still a good time. It's not designed to be fun, it's designed to be a horror game, and it did that extremely well. And it's one thing I noticed a lot of critics miss with the original games. The gameplay is meant to be restricting in order to add to the horror. And there's many questions unanswered, and obviously this game did not have everything in mind, which I'm sure Scott did not think that this was going to turn into a multi-million-dollar franchise spanning 11 fucking years. FNAF 1 has been talked to death, and I'm sure you all know why it made it to the top tier. But you may be asking yourself now, unless you're a freak who knows what every single FNAF game is and have them all memorized, what are the top 3 games, and why are they there? Well, before we find out, if you've been enjoying this video so far, be sure to like and subscribe to help me reach my goal of 100,000 subscribers. But now, let's get into the top 3. The last time we did this, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 was number 1, and honestly at the time, it wasn't even close. However, a year and a bit later, and a couple games later, this game has dropped to 3rd. And you may be wondering why that's the case. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But first, let's talk about all the good things this game has and what made it number 1 the first time. For starters, this is by far the scariest FNAF experience just by itself. The horror in this game is on a whole other level, and looking at the mainline 6 games from FNAF 1 to Pizza Sim, this game is easily the scariest and definitely the best made horror game. On top of having a really solid horror base with its incredible atmosphere, sound design, and animatronics designs, which all look awesome, FNAF 4 also probably has the most solid gameplay loop in the entire series. And even though I personally find FNAF 3's gameplay more fun, this is definitely the most well executed and works the best as it combines the frantic and uneasy nature of FNAF 1 with the resource management and resource use from FNAF 3, where not only does it use every single part of the room and it's dedicated to one character, but there's this sense of unease where you second guess every action you take, which makes the whole experience scarier, and the only way to get through is to calm your nerves and really focus. The nature of sound in this challenge is also extremely creative, and it works exceptionally well as a tool to create horror. And I will take this time to talk about the jump scares, because this is 100% something I have mixed opinions on. While I do think it's an effective use of horror, and it's not a cheesy way to do it, as some people have said, I will say that for accessibility purposes, the audio balancing in this game could definitely use some adjusting, or at the very least have a setting for those who have sensitive hearing, because as someone who has been getting their hearing test recently and, actually is a little bit deaf, I can tell you that it physically hurts to get jump scares nowadays. Which does lead me to my main complaint of this game. The horror is very effective, but once you learn how this game works, the game becomes more of a test not to misclick, and the jump scare sounds can get very frustrating. Having your ears blasted isn't exactly very enticing for replays. This game definitely struggles with replay value, and out of the original games, it's probably the second worst game to replay, with first obviously going to Sister Location. Now this problem wasn't that big of an issue back in the day when I originally made this list. However, replaying it, it's a huge problem and one of my biggest grievances, since I do love this game, and I think it's the best made click team game. But my god is it unbearable on replays. But onto some more positives, the Night 5 switch up is amazing, and those bosses are fun, even if they are easier than the main nights. The Between Night minigames not only add a ton of cool lore, but it's the only instance of a minigame where the minigames themselves are actually scary and tense. Although FNAF 2 does do a pretty good job at doing this as well, and they probably do work better, I don't know what I'm talking about. FNAF 4 also introduces us to challenges rather than a custom night, and they are all extremely interesting, and this is where most of the replayability comes from. But overall, if you want to hear my full thoughts on this game, I did make a dedicated video to this game, even if it's a tad outdated by the fact that I no longer think it's easily the best FNAF game, and is now the 3rd best FNAF game. What's really holding it back is a lack of replayability and some accessibility issues, but otherwise, I still think this game is a horror masterpiece. So VR is something that I truly love, and you wouldn't know it because I don't do it often on this channel. Although I do want to change that because VR is so fun, and there are so many good games out there, and one of my favorite VR experiences has to be FNAF Help Wanted, which has got to be one of the most incredible experiences I have ever had playing video games. The first time you physically are inside the FNAF 1 office is something that I will never ever forget, and the subsequent levels from FNAF 2, FNAF 3, and even FNAF 4, as well as the new minigames such as the vent repair, parts and service, and the dark rooms, are all horrifying. And on top of that, the lore and extra things in this game are really creepy and really interesting, with some super unique and interesting lore that is explained for the various tapes found throughout the game, with that ominous glitch trap character behind you in the main lobby the entire time. Honestly, there's just not much else to say except wow. The atmosphere and music in this game is really well done, and every minigame feels authentic and really works as a VR experience. Although this game is hot dog water in flat mode, but whatever. Like I said, I can't really pinpoint any specific moment in this game that makes it super iconic and an amazing game. Everything about it is just a blast and is frightening, with it having less fun minigames than Help Wanted 2, but having a more iconic horror experience and a way more memorable experience in my opinion. I am also including the Curse of Dreadbed DLC with this game, which I have to say it's definitely a ton of fun. While it's not nearly as memorable as the normal gameplay, this mode by itself has a lot of really fun moments, and playing through the entirety of this game both by myself and with my partner, I got to see just how special this game actually is. The first time in the FNAF 1 office, Toy Freddy walking into your office in FNAF 2, Springtrap being right in front of you, that first time in parts and service, that first jump scare in vent repair, the mystery of the hub world, and the boat ride. Yes, my partner's favourite minigame is the boat ride, but I gotta get on to Help Wanted 2, I'm sure she'll enjoy that game more than this one. Now with this, you may be wondering why this game is only number 2. Surely if it's so good, it's number 1. Well, despite that, this game does have a couple of nasty bugs, like the Fredbear minigame bud where he just kills you if he's in the closet, and to be honest, this game does sometimes just feel like FNAF but VR, which can be a little bit stale for replay playthroughs. But all that aside, this game is still fantastic, and there aren't big issues for me overall. However, the number 1 game on this list is just so good in every single way that it just wasn't a contest from the start. So if you haven't figured out what it is yet, let's go to number 1. So when drafting this video, a lot of contenders were fighting for the top spot. FNAF games all have their flaws, they all have their strengths. We've spent all this time going over that with the previous games. However, never before have I seen a game that has managed to capture the original spark that the original one had. I haven't had a game that has made me fall in love with the franchise again. And then I played Into the Pit. Now this may be a shock for some of you considering I don't play this game on stream, haven't talked about it in videos, and haven't really mentioned it at all. However, that's probably because as a content creator who plays games, I want to separate games that I actively enjoy and have a connection with to content, because that can sometimes make the games feel like a chore to play. Into the Pit is also just a hard game to make content on, because the game just kind of speaks for itself. Sure, there's challenges you can complete in secrets, but it's kind of too perfect and too special to make content for me. Which is probably a selfish thing to say, but having replayed this game for this video, I realized just how special this game actually is. In fact, I have considered making a whole video talking about this game, although I feel that might be a bit redundant, so I'm not too set on that. But what makes Into the Pit so special? Well, a lot. It's quite hard to point to one specific aspect of this game that makes it so good. Everything in this game is just amazing. The story is compelling, well told, and extremely engaging. The gameplay, while sometimes a bit repetitive, knows when to switch things up and offers a good challenge, and honestly does a better job at the free roam than Security Breach does. There's a lot of ways you can choose to play this game. There's a lot of outcomes, and every little thing you do and encounter in this game could be used to help you through something else. The music and atmosphere is honestly extremely underrated, and I think this game has some of the best atmosphere out of any FNAF game, as well as my personal favourite FNAF soundtrack out of any of the games. The music in this game is extremely underrated, and not only fits the FNAF franchise super well, but fits with the absolutely beautiful visuals and sound design, which brings me to something that this game does surprisingly well: horror. For a game series that hasn't really been that scary since the OG FNAF games, this game was honestly extremely terrifying and had some extremely tense moments. Even moments that aren't scary were tense because of the sound design. It actively makes you feel like that at any moment the yellow rabbit will jump out at you. The added minigames needing you not only to stay quiet but prevent yourself from being caught while hiding is an extremely clever addition, as all of a sudden you have to actively prevent yourself from being found and killed. The puzzles on each night were also extremely clever, with you having to go back and forth between the pit world and the real world in order to complete the night. Makes the player extremely engaged, and it's just a ton of fun. There's a lot of memorable and scary moments, and all the secrets in this game are some of the best since the original series. All the arcade minigames were extremely fun, challenging, and replayable. This game also has some of the most powerful endings that I've seen in a long time from a FNAF game, and overall it was quite a replayable game as well. Which, considering how most FNAF games have a slight replayability problem, this game doesn't really have it as bad. I mean, obviously there's a slight replayability problem, but it's so minor and you don't really notice it unless you just play the game back to back to back to back, which you just shouldn't do with any game. I have to say, this game really impressed me in a lot of ways, and Mega Cat Studios ought to be proud of themselves. I really hope they make more games in the future, since this game is absolutely incredible. Not to mention with all the customization of the animatronic AI, the hiding spots, and the hardest modes, which are an extremely fun challenge for those who really want to push themselves to the next level. It offers something for everyone, and if you want a chill experience or an extremely punishing experience, you can get both. There's something for everyone. Into the Pit is just such an amazing game that manages to capture the themes of FNAF in a new and interesting way while also having its own identity. I mean, I'll be honest and say that when I found out there was going to be a game based off the FNAF books, I was generally unsure how I would feel about it, but this game surprised me in a very fantastic way, and it's the game that I think we should be singing way more praise to. Plus, this is the best FNAF game because it's the only game where you actually only spend 5 Nights at Freddy's. Okay, anyway, jokes aside. With that, I don't really have that much more else to say, except that we have finally ranked all the FNAF games from worst to best. Compared to my list last year, this year has changed quite a bit. On top of that, I don't think this list will change all that much with new releases, and ironically, I think the gaming world of FNAF would benefit by just having Mega Cat Studios doing the rest of the games, but we can only dream. Hopefully in the next few years, if I ever decide to make this a game, some new awesome games will have come out. But with that, I hope you've enjoyed this ranking, and if you did, be sure to subscribe to help us hit a goal of 100k by the end of the year, which, might be a stretch, but I think we can do it. Thank you to all my beautiful channel members, and with that, I will see you in the next video.